Do you want to write more authentic law enforcement officers and create investigations that keep the readers turning the pages long after their bedtime? If so, today's guest is for you. Stay tuned. Hi, everyone. I'm joined here today with Sergeant Patrick O'Donnell. And Patrick runs a Facebook group called Cops and Writers, has a podcast of Cops and Writers, and after 25 years in law enforcement, he is retired and sat down and wrote two books now,
Mhm.
all about how us writers can write more authentic law enforcement officers and procedures. His books are also, let's see, we have Cops and Writers from the Academy to the Street and Cops and Writers Crime Scenes and Investigations. Hi, Patrick.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us today. Can you
You
give us
bet.
a little bit about your story? Tell us about
Oh
yourself.
boy, it's a torrid story. No, not really. I'm pretty boring. I was born in Chicago. Both my parents are from Ireland, actually. So I'm first generation U.S. Let's see here. Lived in Chicagoland area until I was in high school. Then we moved to rural Wisconsin because of my dad had a job transfer. So that's where I went to college. When I got out of college, I did all kinds of stuff. I was looking for police jobs, and I it took 6 years to finally land a police job. If you are more geographically flexible, I wanted to stay in Wisconsin. I wanted to live in Madison and I wanted to work there, but that was not in the cards. So I wound up going to Milwaukee, which is about an hour east of Madison. But in the meantime, I worked at an IHOP. I was a manager of an IHOP. Then I sold cars for 4 years. I bartended. I did all kinds of different stuff, to pay the bills. I was a young guy with a sociology degree, and that's what that got me. So all in all, I was taking tests for different departments, and I did pretty good, I guess, on the city of Milwaukee, and there I went. So I worked for the city of Milwaukee for 25 years. I started out in patrol, which we all do. And then after about, I think it was 5, 6 years, I promoted to sergeant and I worked all over the city, did all kinds of fun stuff, had a great career. And then almost a year ago, I decided that that's enough. I hit the 25-year mark. My expiration date was up, and I'm like, yeah, it's time. It's time for me to go. So here I am. And in the meantime, I published 5 books while I was still on the job. And the last 2 books were the Cops and Writers books that you were talking about.
Okay.
Because what happened was I got heavily involved in independent writing. Yeah, the first book that I wrote, actually, a friend of mine had a friend that had a publishing house, and she also had an agent in New York. And I'm like, hey, could you give her my manuscript? And he said, yeah, sure. So I give her the manuscript, and she's like, I love it. I'm going to New York next week. I'm going to pitch it for you. I think we got something here. So I'm like, yeah, all right. I'm going to International Autos, looking at the BMWs. I'm like, oh yeah, I am gonna make all kinds of money. Life is gonna be great. So, a week goes by, and I'm talking to my friend. And I'm saying, hey, how's it going with that? And he said, yeah, we had a falling out. And I'm like, okay, how big of a falling out? He's pretty big. I'm like, all right. So I called her and I said, hey, I understand you and my friend had this falling out, but I hope that doesn't interfere with, what you were going to do for me. She said, oh no, F you, you're done. She said, I threw that in the garbage. Anybody that's, with this guy, I don't want anything to do with. And I'm like, great. All right. So I started listening to podcasts, and there's this crazy thing called KDP, where you can submit your own book. You don't need an agent. There's no gatekeeper. And that's what I did. And I kind of took the ball and I ran. Every book that I wrote, the next one was better. And I hired professionals to do the covers. I hired a professional to do the book description. I have professional editors. So I wanted to make the best quality product that I could and be as professional as I could. And then I got involved in the 20 books to 50K group. Are you familiar with that?
I'm in that one as
Oh
well.
yeah, outstanding. Actually, I spoke the last couple of conferences in Vegas. I had a law enforcement panel. I don't know if you were there for that or not. Did you ever
I
make a
wasn't
conference?
there, but I did hear about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you search on YouTube, it's on there.
Yeah.
And I've met so many just great people. Craig Martell runs it. It's
Mhm.
Michael Anderley's baby, and Craig Martell runs the show. I'm an admin now for the group on the Facebook group, and I think we've got 45,000 members,
Yeah.
and it has just grown. It has exploded.
Hmm.
But it's just really cool how, like I said before, there's no gatekeepers now. You can be as successful as you want to work. How hard do you want to work at it?
Yeah.
That's what it all boils down to. So I'm not at the mercy of, if I want to release 3 books, if I want to work really hard, if I want to release 3, 4, 5 books in 1 year, I can do it. Whereas if you're with a traditional publishing house, they might be, well, we're going to space those out. We're going to 1 this year, then 2 is going to be the next year,
Yeah.
whatever.
Hmm.
So I found that very attractive.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into the publishing thing, and I started the Facebook group Cops and Writers because I saw there was a need for it. Actually, at one of the conferences, people were coming up to me the first conference, and they're like, "Oh, you're the police guy," and there was only like 400 of us, and I'm like, okay," and and it's like, "How much would you charge me to go through your manuscript, through my manuscript?" And I'm like, "I don't even know. I don't even know if I'm doing this. I'm just having a beer right now. Okay, yeah, I'll take a peek." Or and then a little crowd develops, and it's like, "Well, what about this? What about that? I'm writing this character. So okay, there's an interest."
Hmm.
So I hadn't I didn't write the last 2 Cops and Writers books yet. They were in my head, but I didn't put pen to paper, fingers to typewriter, or fingers to computer yet. And I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I'll start this Facebook group. And it's only been a little over a year, I think. Year and a
Really?
half. Yeah. And I've
Then I
got
must have found it. I must have found it when you were very new because I write romance, but I was writing
okay.
to detective characters
All
as my
right.
leads, and I
Gotcha.
wanted to make sure that at least I got that kind of right on there. And so, yeah, I found that Facebook group and loved it. Everyone on there is great.
Yeah, I can't say enough about the people. Just rubbing shoulders with these people who are very successful and people who are just starting out that haven't published anything. Don't be intimidated by the people that are, there there are 7-figure authors there. And I'm just like, wow, it's like I was happy if I could make $25 in a month, and it's like, wow, it's so, and they are more than generous with
Hmm.
giving you the information. But
Yes.
what I have distilled through the years of talking to all these people is, ass has to be in the seat. You have to put in the work, and work smarter, maybe not harder, that kind of thing. Don't get so caught up in, oh my God, what about, Facebook is changing the, whatever for ads, Amazon ads. I just don't understand these things. It is a pay to play world if you really want to make some decent money at this. But, I remember the first time I met Craig Martell, I asked him because it was kind of like a Obi-Wan moment, like in Star Trek. It was like, tell me the secrets, and he says, nothing's going to sell your next book. Nothing's going to sell your book like the next book. He said, just keep writing. He said, don't worry about all this other stuff. He said, people they get so caught up in their heads with all this. And he said, they're forgetting about the most common, like the most basic stuff. And that's what's going to sell. And all the rest will take care of itself, or outsource it, because you're going to start making money.
So, for us writers, what is it that you see in general? What are some of the most common things that us writers get wrong about law enforcement?
How long is this program? This is gonna take us a while.
It'll take us
All
all.
right, everybody. You might as well, get a drink, do whatever you gotta do to get comfortable.
Get
No,
your
no,
water, get your
that's
tea, get your notepad. We're
exactly.
gonna we're picking the Sarge's brain.
Well, let's see. Most stuff on TV or in the movies is wrong. A big chunk, and for part of it, I understand because police work. One time somebody explained it to me, and it made a lot of sense. It's 5 to 10 minutes of absolute adrenaline, on the edge of your seat craziness followed by 6 or 7 hours of writing reports. So you're not going to, see on TV. It's like, yep, he's still writing. Yeah, she's still in front of the computer. Oh, this is exciting. Oh gosh, should I use a comma here? I'm not sure. Maybe a new paragraph, So that's police work. Or you have a big chase, you arrest somebody, you bring him in, and oh man, okay, I'm a diabetic. All right, off to the hospital we go. So you're stuck at the hospital for 2 or 3 hours so they can get their shot of insulin, because once somebody's in custody, their health and well-being is your responsibility. You
Right.
can't just say, oh well, too bad, I arrested you for that warrant. Yeah, you're not going to do so good without that medicine that you need to save your life, so it doesn't go that way. So a lot of police work can be boring, and obviously they can't show that in a
Right.
movie or TV, but they could infer to it and maybe be a little more creative about it, because people think that it's 24/7 just craziness, and it isn't. So as far as misconceptions and all that, I would start out with rank. We all start out as either a police officer if you're working in a city department, some kind of municipality, and if you're working for a sheriff's department, you start out as a sheriff's deputy. And you're at the bottom rank is police officer out, because that's what I was, and the top is chief. Now, depending on the department, the ranks going up might be a little bit different. They'll call them different things. So where I worked, you started out as a police officer, and then the next step was sergeant. And a sergeant is a supervisor.
Okay.
And I was a street supervisor, which meant I'd go out on the street with my guys. And by guys and gals, I just called them, hey, you're my guys. And what would happen is, if there was a fire, if there was an armed robbery, if there was a homicide, if there was a sexual assault, a child abuse, any kind of dead body, I was going to, and I would supervise the scene. A lot of times in movies and TV, etc., yeah, I'll see one or two extremes. One, there won't be any boss at all at any scene, or two, everybody's got stripes on their arms. I'm like, somebody's got to do all the work here, and somebody's got to direct everybody. So this isn't making a whole lot of sense. Then from sergeant, you can promote to lieutenant, and the lieutenant is in charge of, say, their district. We had 7 district stations, and there's probably generally, say, 100 officers that would work at a district station. The department that I worked for, we had oh anywhere between 16 to 1800 members, somewhere in that ballpark, for a city of 600,000. So
Okay.
if that gives you kind of a benchmark, obviously there's smaller and bigger departments. I think New York has the biggest. And you would have a lieutenant that would be in charge of their shift. So when I retired, the shift that I worked was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Usually I had to get there at 7. I'd give roll call, just like on Hill Street Blues. Yeah, there'd be a sarge up there, and okay, you had all the items. You'd go over like major crimes that happened. Okay, we have a description of a 2017 Toyota 4Runner that's silver with this plate. It was used in an armed robbery last night at 1234 West Main Street. Just important stuff like that. Any kind of policy stuff that the chief would be bringing down, say, okay, now men could have their beards now, where before we couldn't have beards. There's grooming standards, because if you're in uniform, there's grooming standards. The ladies couldn't have their hair past their collars, and if so, they'd have to either have a very short ponytail or put their hair up in a bun. Where guys couldn't have it below the top of the collar, that kind of thing. Can't wear earrings. Nobody can wear an earring. Jewelry, you could have one necklace. You couldn't have any more. You could have one ring on your hands. That's it. You could have one bracelet if you want a bracelet. So the sergeant would be the person that would monitor to make sure everybody conformed to all these. And if there was a change in the rules, he'd let them know about it. So you got the sarge, they're in charge of their cops. Then you got the lieutenant, they're in charge of the sergeant and the cops, their shift. And then there would be a captain. The captain would be in charge of the entire district station, in charge of all the shifts, in charge of, there'd usually be 3 lieutenants, because you had a day shift, which is like say 8 to 4, then an early shift, which is 4 in the afternoon till midnight, and late shift, which is midnight to 8, the graveyard shift. So I was on that for 13 years when I was new. And then we had what we called the power shift as well, which was 7 at night till 3 in the morning. And that was the busiest time of the day. So that was to help out the late shift and the early shift cops. And I had a bunch of special cars. I had an anti-gang unit. I had all kinds of fun stuff. It was a lot more proactive policing, where you're going after bad guys, getting lots of chases, having fun like that. So I did that. And yeah, so the captain's in charge of all that. Then above captain would be like, say, a inspector. And I think we only had like 3 or 4 of those. And they're kind of the chief when the chief isn't around. Like at 2 o'clock in the morning, if there's a homicide, the chief isn't going to come out unless it's something very dynamic, or there's a celebrity involved, or there's a police officer involved. Then the chief will come out. But
isn't the chief in some places an elected position?
no, that I was going to get to that. Chiefs are appointed
Okay.
by the city. We have a fire and police commission, which is funny because there's almost no. I think we had one cop on there and he quit because it was getting so ridiculous. I won't talk about politics, but it is ridiculous. And not one firefighter, not one cop on the fire and police commission. So, it was all civilians. It's like, you think you might have one of each just to kind of have their input. But hey, why would we want to know what's going on? That gets in the way. But that's the chief. And then the sheriff is an elected position.
Okay.
If you're the sheriff of a county, where, say, I was in Milwaukee, my jurisdiction was the city of Milwaukee. And there were certain circumstances where I could go anywhere after a bad guy, but my policing and my cops and everything was in the city, where a sheriff's department was, say, Milwaukee County Sheriffs. They had the county as their jurisdiction. So and then sheriff's departments, they are also responsible for the jails, the county jail. That's a big part of what they do. And also the courts. They have bailiffs. They do security for the courts. They also do some civil serving of papers, that type of thing. So they're a little more plugged in to that. And where I worked, they were responsible for the highways. The sheriffs patrol the highways, where we patrol the city streets. Now, sometimes that would intersect. You're waving at the guy going, all right, there's the sheriff's deputy. Hey, how are you doing? He's going off the freeway chasing somebody, or, something like that. Or we're on the freeway chasing somebody, somebody's trying to get away from us. So our two worlds would interject every now and then. Okay. So that's patrol. Then there's the detective bureau, investigations. Where I worked, you started out as a police officer, like I said. Then you could take the test for detective. And then from there, you would have to take the test to be a sergeant. And a detective, I'll back up a little bit, is an investigator. They're not a supervisor. That's something you see that really gets portrayed wrong, where, you have this detective that shows up at a scene and he starts bossing around all these cops, or even like, lieutenants and captains, it's like, I want this and I want that. And in real world, it's like, yeah, people in hell want ice water, but they ain't having it, buddy. No, you could go shove that. So they have bosses, again, like in movies and television, it's like you have the rogue detective that's working on his own, that's, going to solve the big case, and he's breaking all the rules. Well, he'd probably wind up losing his job if he broke all the rules, and he might go to jail too. So yeah, that really gets out of hand sometimes. So in some departments, they require their police officers to become detectives, but sometimes there's some departments that don't even call them detectives. They call them investigators. So you do your 3 or 4 years or 5 years or whatever as a detective or an investigator, then you go back to patrol. So you have that set of skills. It's a different job. You're not, especially in a big city, you're not taking assignments like a police officer does. The cops are the ones who do all the heavy lifting. They're the ones who are getting into the chases. If there's going to be any kind of shooting or anything like that, 90% of the time it's the cops, because they're the first responders.
Right.
along with the sergeant. So all the cool, super dynamic, whatever, you see in movies and TV that these detectives are chasing everybody in real life. And we tease them. It's like, hey, look, the second responders showed up. Hey, nice of you to join us. Yeah, you'd have a homicide. We would contain the scene, seal it all off, and then detectives would get there a half an hour to an hour later. You know, like I said before, like on TV and movies, they're like instant. There's an army of detectives that arrive like within minutes, and it's like, no, that's not going to happen, especially in a big city. Now, in a smaller jurisdiction where there isn't that many members, sometimes they might use detectives to augment, calls for service. They might, or if something big kind of jumps off. Whereas where I was, we didn't have to worry about that. We had enough members. We had enough people in patrol, so it's a different job. So that gets kind of screwed up a little bit. And then going along with the detective route, so one thing that I really see that jumps out at me, and yeah, it's hard to watch TV shows now with my wife. For I don't know how many years, she's just like, "Oh," I'm like, can we just watch like a comedy, because this police show is just so bad. You know, you have one thing is interviews and interrogations. So they get the bad guy and they have him in this interrogation room, and there's two detectives, and both of them are armed. You never go into an interrogation room armed. You never have your gun with you if you go into an interrogation room. And right away, they're screaming at this person. Yeah, I've seen, I forget, I think it was Chicago PD, Hawaii 50, whatever, all the shows that my wife likes, where they're shoving guns in people's mouths. It's like, tell me you blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, he can't say anything. There's a gun in his mouth. How can he talk? So, and I kindly I remind my wife that, hey, most interview rooms, everything's being recorded.
Mm-hmm.
So guess what? You start doing that, you're going to prison. There's no ands, ifs, or buts. I don't care how heinous the crime is. A good interrogator, a good interviewer is the person that will have this person, the bad guy, feeling bad about what they did and writing out an apology letter to the victim's family. I'm sorry I killed your mom. That was really bad of me. Blah. What's an apology? That's a confession. And then Miranda, oh my God, that is so misused.
Mm-hmm.
Either it's overused or it's non-existent. As far as overused, I've seen TV shows where, I don't even think the person's under arrest, and they're like, you have the right to remain silent, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, he's not in custody. You don't have to do that. This person, you don't have to Mirandize somebody to find out, hey, what's your name, your address, your date of birth? No. But then the flip side of the coin is there's this big like homicide, and there's this climactic scene in an interview room or even like on the street, which is even stupider. And and I look at my wife after this person just spills their guts, and I said, what that person just said means absolutely nothing, is not admissible in court. And she would walk. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, I'm going to bang my head against the wall. So that is really misrepresented. A good interrogator, a good interviewer, and it's police officers and detectives that do this. It's not just detectives, are the ones who are calm and cool, and it's like playing chess.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at the person's weaknesses and you're playing off of them. And like I said, you're going to have people like, oh, thank you so much. I wanted to get this off my chest. I've had people thanking me, I don't know how many times. And I don't have to do anything extra crazy. You have to be a good actor sometimes.
Yeah.
And, it's like you have to empathize with these people, which is really difficult because there's a lot of really nasty people. There's a difference between somebody who just made some bad decisions and they're going to pay the piper for it, or there's just people that are literally rotten to the core that do some just horrible stuff to people. There are victims and victim families that they'll never be the same after something that they just did. But as a good interrogator, you can't think about that. You have to be on their side. It's like, yeah, I understand why you did what you did. You had a tough life growing up, blah, blah, blah. So they literally crawl into a bad guy's head
Mm-hmm.
and just they meld with them, and then boom, there's your confession.
Yeah, I like to watch the watch those on YouTube. There's true crime, and you can see in some the recordings from
Hmm.
those interrogations, and it's quite interesting actually to watch a real one that
Oh,
has
sure.
happened.
But what you don't see on those shows is sometimes it's hours and hours and hours. Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to the detective who interrogated Jeffrey Dahmer, and he was in a room with him for I don't know how many hours. I think it was almost a day. And I was like, that would be creepy. And he's like, oh yeah, and he was great. Every time I was a newer police officer, and every time he would do an interrogation, I would listen outside by the door, and I'm like, man, this guy is good. Holy cow, he could sell ice to people who lived in Alaska. There's no doubt of he could to people who live in Wisconsin, where I'm in. Yeah, I was like, yeah, like we don't have enough, but he could do that if he wanted to. He was that good. Let's see, guns. Guns are completely misrepresented in police shows. Just the way that they handle guns. Some of them you could tell have had some training. One of the things that jumps out is your finger never goes on the trigger unless you're ready to go bang, unless you're ready to shoot the gun, the pistol or the
Right.
rifle. And you see these people running around with their fingers on the trigger, and you just cringe. It's like, no, that's a huge no-no. Or they're literally pointing their guns at each other when they're clearing a house for a bad guy, something like that, and they're being all dramatic, and I'm like, yeah, you can tell that you had zero training on this is not okay. Or the gun never runs out of ammunition. I want one of those guns. Yeah, it's just, yeah, I'd be next to my wife, and I'm like, this guy's been shooting for a while.
Yeah.
It hasn't reload. Nope, no reload.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an extra special cool gun this guy has, because I don't know how he's doing it.
Yes. I've
Or
noticed that too. I have no
yes,
training, and
yeah,
I noticed that.
yeah, that's pretty hokey.
Yeah.
And then the rack of the slide, there's semi-automatic pistols and revolvers. They have the wheel in the middle, and the semi-automatic, they do the racking.
Hmm.
Now, if you're a police officer, there's a round in the chamber, and it's ready to go before you leave, before you step out of that building. One of the jobs of the sergeant is to make sure they're ready to go, because most police shootings are either ambushes or something that happened within 2 or 3 seconds.
Okay.
It's so you don't have time to rack rounds. It's for dramatic effect. Or they're talking about, yeah, they're taking the safety off their Glocks don't have exterior safeties. Yeah, that kind of thing. Or a shotgun, I've seen it where they rack around in with a shotgun, and they keep on racking. And in real life, the shells would start ejecting out of the side, so it's obviously empty.
Hmm.
And then I'll see he pushes the trigger and it goes bang, and I'm like, it should be empty. I don't know how anything is shooting out of that, but okay. Or my personal favorite, where they start shooting locks off of doors. That is
Oh
the
yeah.
very last thing you want to do, because all kinds of shrapnel is going to be flying from that bad boy. That's just dumb. That's just, yeah, we don't do that. That's a bad thing. That's very bad. um, then getting back to detectives, one thing that's really confused is private eyes. A private detective,
Hmm.
private investigators, working with the cop to solve the case. No, we're not going to work with anybody unless you're a cop to solve any case. You know, unless a private detective comes to you with some information that might be valuable, okay, fine, we'll take that and we'll run with it. But we're not going to work together on the case. And if a detective wants to work kind of on the down low with them, well, now they're risking their jobs. That's really stupid. A job. My brother was actually a private investigator, and he did a ton of surveillance on cheating spouses, uh, insurance fraud, and sometimes defense attorneys will hire private investigators and to re-interview witnesses. Okay, Terry, you say that you saw this O'Donnell guy breaking into this house. Where were you standing? Was it dark? Did you see his face? Anything to discredit, your test. If you have to testify, anything to discredit that. But as far as getting into car chases and shootouts, no, they do not. That's not their job. Most of it's civil. It's not criminal. The only way that I've had any contact with a private investigator in a criminal investigation, like I said, would be like maybe a missing person, maybe the family of the missing would hire a private investigator. And if they had some information they want to share with us, yeah, sure, we'll check it out. But no, another thing that you see is, and it's in some storylines, is psychics. Let's get that psychic in here so she could solve the case, with the crystal ball and whatever else. And what people have to realize is whatever you do for an investigation, it's all going to be discovery for a trial. So if I have a psychic come in and say, Terry did this, she killed this person and buried them in her backyard. Okay. Even if I, even if it's true, and I hope you didn't, even if it's true, yeah, I have to explain to a jury how I thought it was okay to hire this psychic. That's not a police officer that, and it wouldn't take too long for a defense attorney to just tear them apart on the stand. It would be ugly.
Right.
So you have to keep that in mind. So that's that.
Can you talk about the appropriate procedures for making an arrest?
Sure. There's a couple of different ways we make arrests. One, the easiest, is a warrant. A warrant is signed by a judge commanding law enforcement to bring that person into custody, take that person into custody, and have them face the music, have them go to literally stand before a judge and, face whatever charges are coming at them. So a lot of times there's a couple of different ways that we would get arrest warrants. One would be you work a case and you work up enough probable cause for arrest. Say it could be something as simple as a burglary. Somebody broke into your house, took your grandma's ring that you had, that was this rare emerald with this really cool design. And being the good detective that I am, or a police officer, I went to the local pawn shops, and sure enough, Joey or Jane Smith, went there. They sold the ring to the pawn person, and most pawn shops require some form of ID. They take a picture of your driver's license, etc. So you follow the breadcrumbs. So you make a good faith effort to try and find this person. I can't find this person. So you go to the DEA, say, this is what I have. This is all the evidence that I have. I have Joe's fingerprints, at the scene. I have his driver's license, a picture of him and his driver's license. I have him on video. Almost all pawn shops have, video surveillance. I have all this mountain of evidence here that he, broke into this house. And then the DA is like, yeah, good. They'll draft up a warrant. Then a judge will sign it. And then, then a year later or 6 months later, Joey could be driving down the street and get stopped for speeding. And whenever you're stopped for a traffic violation, we run you for wants and warrants. So a lot of times that's how we'd pick people up on arrests. And it's like, hey, got some bad news for you, buddy. Or they were arrested. I was able to find Joey right away, like a couple of days after the burglary. And he was let out on $500 bail, and he skipped his bail and he's out in the wind. So, the judge is like, I don't think so. So they'll issue a bench warrant for Joey. And then, like I said before, a lot of times it's just dumb luck that they get caught. Now, something more high profile, like say a homicide, there's departments that have like fugitive apprehension units that are police officers and detectives that work together, and they're going after these high profile like homicide people, and that's with a warrant. So those are warrants. The other way I can arrest somebody is with probable cause. And probable cause is the quantum of evidence that would lead a police officer to believe that this person has committed the crime. It has to be more than a hunch or a feeling. I can stop somebody. It was Terry versus Ohio was the court case. We called them Terry stops. And one of the easy examples would say it's 2:00 in the morning. It's in a very high crime area, and there's an alarm going off at a storefront. The front door it was all glass and now it's all broken in. And there's a guy that's just standing there, just loitering. I have every right in the world to stop this person and talk to them, to find out what their story is, what they're up to. Now, let's say this person is in the same area, the alarm's going off, broken windows, all that. He's got a crowbar in his hand and he's wearing a ski mask, and it's August and 90 degrees outside, and he's wearing all black. I'm not Sherlock Holmes, but I think I could deduct from this what's going on. And he cut his hand from trying to get in, etc. So I can place him under arrest and then search incident to arrest. I'm going through his pockets and he has items from the store that he just broke into. So that just strengthens my case even more. So that's when you arrest somebody. So where I worked, you took them to the district station that they were arrested in. That's where they'd be booked in. When I first started, we didn't take pictures and prints. The sheriff's department did that, but it changed. We take pictures and prints now, and they take everything out of their pockets. You can only have one layer of clothes. Shoestrings have to come out of your shoes. No belts, drawstrings, anything like that. No jewelry. That's all inventoried, put in a bag. There's like lockers with the numbers. So if you're in cell number 1, all your stuff is going in locker number 1. And you get a receipt for all your stuff. And you go into a jail cell. It's a temporary holding facility. The police officer that arrested you has to do the reports. And that could take 3, 4, 5 hours, depending. Sometimes quicker, sometimes less. And then you might be interrogated there. Now, if the detective bureau is interested in you for whatever reason, they might come out to the district and interrogate you, or you're going to go downtown with them. You're going to take them downtown. So let's say let's say he's intoxicated. He's drunk. You can't interrogate somebody that's drunk. That's another thing that they get wrong in TV and movies. If you're impaired in any way, no, because you know that if it ever goes to a trial, isn't a true officer that you question my client here, and he admits that he drank a 6-pack of beer and a bottle of Jack Daniels an hour before the I'm like, oh, oops. So that wouldn't work so great. So let's say all that happens, you get all your reports signed by the lieutenant or an acting lieutenant. It's kind of like going to the principal's office. You write all these reports, and back when I started, they're all handwritten, and you would go in there and they literally would take out a red pen and just start, you spelled that wrong, there should be a comma there, et cetera, and you go back and redo everything. Now it's all on computers, so they check on the computer. So after all that is done, then the police officers can go back into service and take more calls, and then the person who's under arrest will eventually wind up at the county jail. And then from the county jail, they're going to either have a bail hearing or a probable cause hearing, and eventually that's where they're released from. It could take a day, it could take 2 days. It's not a real long time. Sometimes it only takes like 12 hours, depending if it's a weekend or not, that kind of thing. And then what happens is, where I work, we have district attorneys. There is a district attorney for the county and then a bunch of assistant district attorneys. So an assistant district attorney is going to review all the paperwork for this case, any evidence, like say there was video surveillance of this guy inside the store that was just burglarizing it. And they decide if they're going to charge this person with burglary, maybe something less, maybe something more, or they're going to no process it. Say you don't have enough evidence, because their burden of proof is higher than a police officer's probable cause. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt if it goes to trial, where all I need is probable cause. So it's at a different level on the bar. Okay. And that's that. That's how we do it.
So is there another Cops and Writers book coming?
Oh boy. I was thinking about doing a forensics one, and I might co-write it with somebody because there's an interest in it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an expert in forensics.
Right.
I was the guy who went to the homicide. I was the guy who went to the robbery. I was the guy who, the dead body laying somewhere. I was at those scenes, and I'd have the forensic people come, and it's like, okay, do your thing.
Right.
I didn't get into the nitty gritty, and
Right.
that's not my area of expertise, but I think there's an interest in it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. What about your fiction work? Do you have anything coming up there?
you know, I wrote a post-apocalyptic book a couple of years back. It was called Mad City, and it was kind of a cross between Mad Max and James Bond. It was a post-apocalyptic in Wisconsin, and I was starting to write the sequel to that book called Dead Beach, where my main character winds up in Daytona Beach, and a post-apocalyptic Daytona Beach, and there's a bunch of subplots with it and all that, and I was about halfway done with it, and that's when all this cops and writers stuff kicked off. So I knew there was an interest, and the Facebook group was just exploding. So I'm just like, yeah, I just shelved that. So yeah, I might go back to that. Who knows?
Who knows? Where can readers find out more about you and your books?
Uh, my website, copsandwriters.com, the Facebook group, Cops and Writers, my podcast. I just launched a podcast this week, Cops and Writers. I'm really excited about that because you don't just listen to boring old me. I have really good guests on the show. I've already done 10 episodes that I'll release every Monday. I just got done interviewing a female Irish police officer in Ireland. What a great world we live in. It was like she was like in front of me. It was great. Think about it. Like 10 years ago, you'd be scratching your head going, it's like, no way, that would never happen. But hey, things are awesome. Then I think it was the second episode that I released is female Royal Canadian Mountie. I
Okay.
interviewed her, and I've got actually a forensic, a DNA specialist coming on pretty soon. I also had Adam Richards, who is in charge of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast and Facebook page. That's really good. So, yeah, you can find me on any of those places. Or if you want to email me, sarge@copsandwriters.com.
That's right. And as usual, I will have all of Patrick's links down in the description below. Be sure to like and comment and subscribe for more author interviews. Thank you so much for your time today.
You bet. It was fun.
Thanks. And thanks everyone for viewing, and I'll see you next week.